All right, so I realize who I'm talking to, and I realize that this is a silly comment in light of where Netflix is now, et cetera. But your original idea for DVD by mail, it's a pretty terrible idea at first glance. Like, at the time you came up with this idea, this was a very bad idea because we had Blockbuster Video on every corner, Family Video, whatever the other chains were. Who the hell wants to wait 3-4 days to get a scratched DVD in the mail for a movie that you might not feel like watching anymore, if it even arrives at all, right? So without pretending that you could have seen the future, what were you thinking at that point?
Well, I think most of us were just thinking about, let's create something where we can get a paycheck. We were trying to solve, it wasn't until later that we were solving the big problem of late fees, because that was a huge negative. In the very, before we even were mailing DVDs, our first idea was to create a entertainment portal, like a Hollywood site where you could get the gossip and the news, and then the DVD rental was kind of the side part.
Oh, wow.
So
it's going to be like TMZ, and then you went, nah, let's just make Netflix. One of those, I think you pivoted correctly there, or came up with the right idea.
Yeah. But still the idea still had a couple of merits, and that is people didn't have a big selection in their average video store, even Blockbuster. They typically would carry 2,000-3,000 titles. And we were all people who loved foreign movies, documentaries, even silent films. And so one of the kind of original benefits we thought of the kind of the second phase after the entertainment portal was to have an entire library of everything imaginable, Hindu films, films from all over the world. And then second, of course, not having to go in and deal with all the issues in video stores. Those two ideas, were basically the beginning.
Your life is so wild and crazy, especially early on. This is what we talked about sort of on our calls prior to the show. And I think it really reinforces and explains how you became such a divergent thinker, if that term fits, and an executor of these quite, at the time, especially unique ideas. So my plan here on this episode of the show, I'm going to be a little bit lazy early in the episode and just have you tell some of these stories, and then we can distill some of the lessons and the wisdom later on as we see them applied to business. How does that sound? I usually... Yeah. Okay, cool.
Sounds good.
It's the holidays. I'm unplugging, man. No, I'm kidding. Right. But it sounds like you had somewhat of an unstable childhood. You moved a lot. You sound like a bit of a planner, a bit of a schemer, always planning things out. Not schemer in a shady way, but just sort of like I was. Just sort of, what can I do to make some money? What can I do to do this? What if I do this a different way, backwards, upside down kind of thing? Tell me about meeting Funky Sam.
Well, I went to a small kind of one of these new age high schools. And the idea was you were more in charge of your education than the school administration or the teachers. And as part of that, we did one year, half of the school went to Cuba to harvest sugarcane. Of course, in those days, they had to go via Canada on a boat.
You just went to do slave labor in Cuba for no reason with political prisoners or something in the cane fields? That's so weird, man.
Yeah. Well, I got warned by a family member before I headed to Canada to not go. So I didn't go.
They might keep you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I ended up, going up to Canada and working at an underground newspaper as a kind of free intern. But the whole kind of all those experiences made me understand is that I was in charge of what I did, of where I directed my energy, who I wanted to hang out with, where I wanted to go. And it just made the world like this gigantic adventure. If you talk about a bucket list, I had 1,000 places I wanted to go, 1,000 people I wanted to meet. And that just kind of started from there and became ingrained in me, not consciously. I never kind of thought about it in that way, but I think it just became part of who I was.
I like that. I want my kid to learn that. You hear about these child-led education type things. I don't know. It sounds like back then they were even more fast and loose with potential liability. I'm trying to think what school is like, let's go to North Korea and farm or whatever for the summer. That should be fine. What could go wrong?
Yep.
Although Cuba has nicer weather. And maybe it's easier to get rescued by the military if you get thrown in a slammer.
It's closer. It's closer.
Yeah, it's closer, exactly. So this kind of, I guess, again, divergent thinking or thinking for yourself or directing your own, writing your own destiny, writing your own ticket, that sort of started early. And this guy, Funky Sam, later on, this is sort of where the book begins, right? He gives you this weird, in air quotes, opportunity.
Right. So he was, I could tell that he liked my mom more than just a friend. And having two teenage sons, who have had a mom who's married a couple times, was single at the time, or at least, not with someone, kind of put us in his way. We were overly protective. So when I decided I needed to leave California, this was halfway through my senior year, all instigated by me seeing my girlfriend kissing another guy. And I reacted, kind of angrily. He saw this great opportunity to move one of the kids out of the way by offering me this idea to become his European salesperson for his blacklight posters. And, very typical of how I've been ever since then is I don't kind of weigh up the pros and cons. I've never taken out a legal pad and put the pros of doing this on one side and I just go, that sounds interesting. Gets me out of here. Okay, I'll give it a try. And never thinking about, am I qualified? What could happen? What's the worst that could happen? So yeah, I headed over on Icelandic Airways via the capital of Iceland, Reykjavik.
Yeah, nice, nice way to navigate on that.
To Germany. Crashed at my dad's house and went out with a roll of posters and an order form and started going to bookstores and places where they would sell posters and sold those posters.
Wow. Okay. So you just showed up in Europe and you're like, hey, I got posters I got to sell. Was there any plan? I mean, are you standing on a street corner with a bunch of posters, or are you going to music stores and you're like, hey, check this out. They're from America. They're really cool.
Yeah, I can't remember who gave me this advice, but they said you should go to the big booksellers, go to places that are selling books and, kind of things like posters. There really wasn't a big poster business going on in Germany. But the very first location I went into, which was in Frankfurt, Germany, ordered what equals $100,000 worth of posters, these blacklight posters. And
wait, $100,000. How many posters is that? Because this is 19 whatever's money. What year is this?
This is 1970. I think the early part of 1970.
Whoa. $100,000 in 1970. Let me hold on. We're going to do a little magic pause here because I have an inflation calculator. Because I assume you don't have that figure at the top of your head.
No.
What that equals in today's money. So 1960, what year was this again? Sorry, 60.
I do 1970. I think it was March of 1970.
Oh, wow. So this is $729,820 in today's money. So this is $750,000 worth of posters. You don't have a box of posters. You have was this like you said before, was this like a shipping container full of posters?
Well, more? I arrived, my job was to go out and get orders that then the company would ship to the buyer.
But you didn't
And
bring them all
of
with you.
course,
That makes more sense. Shows you what I know about about importing things.
and of course, I would arrange payment. I would get a check for a down payment, kind of a good will type of advance, and then pass the order back to Funky Sam back in Sausalito, California. And the reason this was such a big hit is, of course, San Francisco. This was the '60s had just been over. All the music, all the hip new stuff for rock and roll was coming out of San Francisco or London. And blacklight posters were something people in Germany had seen and heard about, but had no access to. It wasn't.
I see.
So these were just a gigantic hit for the store was a chain of stores and thought they're going to, and I can't remember the average price, but there was 20 or 30 different posters, different themes, and from one that was kind of a yoga pose, and it actually was Funky Sam with a woman sitting on his lap. Another was all the Disney characters in lewd positions. You could see the little feet. Well. Yeah, the little feet of the seven dwarfs sticking out from under Snow White's dress.
Oh, wow. I see. So that's, it's pretty, yikes. That's very cool. In Europe, though, that's like not a big deal. In America, that's you get canceled for that back then.
Well, the company, shortly after, the company went bankrupt because they were sued by Disney.
Into oblivion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that must have been kind of a bummer. I assume then these were really easy to sell and you were making money hand over fist?
Well, I had done a couple of sales before the company went into bankruptcy. I mean, it was just a few months after I got there. And so I only walked away with about $20,000, which was the commission they had given me as a result of these sales, not paying me the full amount until the full transaction was completed, which never happened.
Which never happened. But bear in mind, $20,000, 1970, that's $146,000 in today's money. So that's more money than anybody your age has ever seen in their entire life anywhere.
I was flush with cash.
Yeah.
I bought a car. I eventually bought a motorcycle. I traveled all over the place.
Yeah, that's incredible. So now where are you at this point? You're in Germany, you made a bunch of sales of these posters. Tell me about going around Europe. I mean, you're just, at this point, rich, probably not worried about a job for the next several months / not thinking about ever working at this point. I mean, if you're that age and you have that much money, you're probably halfway to retirement in your mind.
Not in my mind. It is true. I didn't think about, I need to make a lot more money, but I never thought about it as I have enough to retire. I tried that years later to retire, and it just doesn't work for me. And I think I'm one of those people that suffers from that characteristic where you're always trying to prove, mostly I'm trying to prove to my parents that I'm better than I thought they thought I was.
Oh, so, interesting. Wow. That's the hole that can never be filled, right?
Right. Especially when they pass away.
Yeah. Like they can't even say, hey, man, we're proud of you. Knock it off already and relax, right. Take a breath. Yeah, it's like you're just envisioning them at the time where they thought, what, this loser sits in his room and smokes pot all day. He's never going to amount to anything. That's just the tape that's on replay in your head.
Right. But I did, what was fascinating about that time is I was able to, this is, of course, you've got, 5 countries in Yugoslavia. You've got crossing every border has a different currency. And there was starting to be a few places around Europe where kind of hippies and beatniks were hanging out. One of them was Positano, which now, of course, is for the very rich. And so that's where I headed first. And I would just kind of go from place to place like that and stay for a month. I would get odd jobs just so I got to meet people. I was a DJ in a disco in Positano and knew nothing about what I was doing, but I was the American who must know music. It's so much different today. American music isn't considered like the only music. In those days, rock and roll from the U.S. or from England was kind of the only thing young people listened to. So
yeah, when I lived in the former East Germany, and bear in mind this was like what my host father talking about the communist days. Musicians weren't like, oh, let's check out some of this Russian stuff. It was just American music smuggled in on whatever they could get, sewn into the seat of a car or something, right? It's just absolutely, and you're copying, doing whatever you can to copy, I don't know, tapes, I guess, or 8 tracks. I don't even know if they even could. Maybe they had records only back then. I'm not sure. They just smuggled them in. And I mean, this is like going to listen to the Pink Floyd concert as far as you could get towards the Berlin Wall next to a minefield just so you could hear the music, that
Right.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So how did you end up in Israel? Because that's, not part of Europe, as many people probably know.
Yeah. Well, the girl who I found kissing another guy, eventually she and I made up. And in fact, we're still great friends. She decided to come over and spend a couple months with me in Europe during the summer when she got out of school.
Once she found out I had $146,000 in 2022 cash, she changed her tune. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I don't think that was it. But anyway, maybe
I'm just kidding.
So we traveled around, and her family were big supporters of the Labor Party in Israel. And her mother came to meet us in Switzerland and said, I'll take you to Israel. So she did. And when we got to Israel, this friend of mine's mother was always trying to break us up. I was the dirty hippie, that was probably never going to get a real job. They were a very traditional family. And so when we were in Israel, my girlfriend started kind of admiring the uniforms of the female military in Israel, saying, wow, those uniforms are great. And she wanted to buy a uniform and take it back to the US with her. And I thought, here we were Vietnam War protesters. And I thought, this is, pretty wrong of you to admire just because it's, a country you're associated with, to admire war and admire, these uniforms. So I told her, and I remember this as clear as day, saying, if you really believe in Israel, you should stay and fight instead of just buying a token uniform. And her mother overheard that, and this was her opportunity. She said, well, how do you feel about it? And I said, well, I'm going to show you what you do when you really care about something. And she, within a day or two, I was on a bus to a kibbutz that guarded the border where the Yarmuk River hits the Jordan. It's a kibbutz called Ashdod Yaakov Ikhud. And
wow, you walked right into that trap. You set that
totally
trap
walked
yourself
in.
and then walked into it. Yeah, exactly. Wow. So you end up on a bus headed to a kibbutz. Did you know what you were into? I mean, these are farms that are on the border. They get shelled. People shoot at the people that are growing, I don't know, strawberries or whatever the hell they grow out there. Or they're making, I don't know, wooden benches. And they're constantly under attack. Because they're kind of like they're in borderlands, usually, a kibbutz, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And this was a very hotly contested border. I had no idea. I just, I found in most things in life, if you think too much about, where you're headed or where you're going, you probably would just stay home. And so, yeah, I had no idea how hard the work would be. And, it probably was more dangerous than it felt. I mean, once you were there, yes, there was attacks in the area. There was, just before I got there, there was a anti-vehicle mine attached to an irrigation ditch. It's these old World War II mines the Germans used to leave on vehicles. They'd leave on the battlefield, and when the Allies would get in the truck, they'd turn the wheel and it'd blow up.
Wow.
And the Fatah was using those to attach to the irrigation wheels on the Israeli kibbutz. And shortly before I got there, there was a father and a son killed on one of those. But, generally there was not a lot going on, except across the border on the Jordan side, there was a town called Ma'adi. And there was once in a while, there was strafing of the village, scare out the farmers. One day we were asked to get on a bulletproof tractor, a shielded tractor, and drag a sled over there, a cart to harvest all the Jordanians' grapefruit and bananas. But there was. It didn't.
You were harvesting someone else's bananas? That's confusing.
Yeah. So where we were, there's this river called the Yarmuk River. Mm-hmm. And just past us, that Yarmuk River flows into the Jordan River. So we were just south of the Sea of Galilee. On the north side was the Golan Heights, and then on the other side of the Golan Heights, Syria. But on the other side of the Yarmuk River was Jordan. And little farm villages. And everybody in that area grew bananas and grapefruit and, things like that. So at one point, and this little bridge had all these, this piece of property had been purchased from Arabs as far back as 1920. So it had been in Zionist hands for many, many years. And during this period of time, there was times, one time in particular, where we as the kibbutz volunteers were asked to, hook up to the tractor. It was a John Deere, but bulletproof windows, metal all around the cabin. Take these sleds, which were on wheels, across the bridge onto the Jordanian side, and with a few volunteers, and harvest the farmers' grapefruits and bananas.
I see. And this is with the farmer's permission. You're not just like stealing their crops at this point.
I'm sure there was not permission given.
Okay, so you're literally stealing these guys' fruit. Oh, no wonder they're pissed off at you. I mean, okay, and people who don't know what Zionist is, it's a term for essentially the Jewish people, settlers in Israel. So these are Jordanians, Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians who are like, get off our damn land, and that conflict was going on then just as it is now, and you're kind of the bad guy in this scenario if you're stealing someone's oranges. You
right.
know? Yeah, got it.
So, yeah, I think it was just indicative of the time. This is, there's no computers, available, from a personal standpoint. You crossed a border and no one, all they had was your passport. There was no huge database. It was just, things were done more kind of in expediency or opportunity, as opposed to, having kind of the rule of law and the rule of governance.
That sounds like the Middle East now. I don't even know if there's a difference. Yeah, right. This is very much how things seemingly run over there even now. It's wow. I can't even. This is one of those things you do in your 20s, and then you look back and you go, "Wow, that was kind of a dumb idea." It's like me going to North Korea a bunch of times. I'm like, I probably shouldn't have done that all those times, or even things I did in the former Yugoslavia. I mean, there's plenty of times I could have stepped on a landmine because I decided to go pee in a minefield and didn't notice what the chain was around the field that I jumped into because I'm too dumb or drunk or whatever, just stupid stuff like that. Weren't there must have been so many attacks. I know you got asked to go into a bulletproof bunker, but don't they set landmines for you guys to step on in the crops? I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that happening in kibbutzim, right?
Yeah, there was a time for, I guess, about a month or two where because I told them, hey, I spent all my summers on my grandparents' farm in Nebraska, and I know how to operate these tractors, I was given the job of dragging a lead sled on the dirt farm roads every morning about 3:30 in the morning, just in case a landmine had been planted in the dirt road.
Wow.
And I never blew up one, but eventually, after about a month or so, the kibbutz said, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Let's just pave the roads. So they ended up paving all the
Yeah.
farm roads. So, anything planted in it would be visible. But yeah, it was a time where, there was a lot of back and forth. There was always the belief that the Fatah, which was the
These are
Arab
malicious.
terrorists,
Yeah.
could cross the river or harm the children on our kibbutz slept underground all the time, every night,
Sure.
just to stay safe.
Gosh, wow. This is one of those. There must have been some greater lesson in here. I mean, there's these people who are doing this are very committed. Because of course, what listeners are asking themselves right now is, why would anybody go on a farm where you can get shot? Farming's already hard. Why are you going on a farm where you could step on or drive over a landmine? These are small groups of very committed people. Whether what they're committed to is right or not that's a different 100 episodes of podcasting, right? So,
Right.
that must have sunk in a little bit.
There was a huge lesson and a huge curiosity that came from that. And that was, I came to admire so much the Israelis and the kibbutzniks, for what they created out of nothing and how hard they worked and how committed they were. And I thought, what's going on the other side of this border? How can these people be so committed to the destruction of these wonderful people? And what it made me want to do, which I did a few years later, is get to know the other side. And on the other side, I found just as wonderful people committed, to great things and, building great lives for their families and children. And it taught me this lesson that there are many, many times where there's two sides who hate and want to kill each other and are equally good people generally, but something comes out, when you're competing against another culture that just brings out the evil and the awfulness that people generally aren't. And it just made me realize there's always two sides to everything. There is really, in a way, you can't say the Israelis are right or wrong, and you can't say the Palestinians especially are right or wrong. They've both been wronged and are both equally justified and in what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a complicated lesson, I think, for people to absorb, right? Because humans are used to tribalizing, picking a side, and then making the other side completely wrong about everything. And that's human nature, unfortunately. But that's how we align ourselves with groups and stay alive over thousands of years as a species. So it's pretty tough programming to undo. I assume at some point, did you want to see the other side at all? Did you want to go? Were you tempted to, like, I don't know, live in maybe not Syria? Although at that time it was probably safer than a lot of the other places in the Middle East.
Yeah, I absolutely did. And I did. I ended up setting up a shirt factory in Damascus. This is after I left Israel. I moved to Monte Carlo and had a beautiful little apartment right on the hairpin turn of the Formula One Grand Prix. So I was everybody's favorite friend during May every year. But I would go to Syria, and remember here I'm always trying to figure out a way to make money, with very little in the way of experience. And one of the ideas that I had was I'm going to go to Lebanon and Egypt and Syria and Turkey and try to understand, what's going on the other side of this war. And I ended up becoming great friends with people in Damascus who were merchants. And they saw a shirt I was wearing, which was a cowboy shirt with the embroidery, over the pockets and the pearl buttons. And they said, we could make those. And as we talked, I found out the only thing they lacked was a button installer. It's a little kind of either handheld or machine thing that puts that button in the shirt. So we started making these cowboy shirts, and I would sell them in Paris. I would sell them, to kind of high-end fashion stores, and everything was made in Damascus except for the piping, which was right under the embroidery. That had to be made in Beirut. So I would have to go back and forth. I'd spend a month at a time in Damascus and Beirut, and then eventually I became friends with a really great guy in Cairo. So I spent a lot of time on the Arab side and got to know even Palestinians, people who at one point were in the militia in Fatah.
Wow, this is really interesting. So you've got this. Is it a circuit where you're going through? I mean, I know you did a lot of travel through the Eastern Bloc as well. Why don't we talk about that? Because I know you had your lucrative 3-stop model of trade, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. This kind of system I set up was to buy a old Mercedes in Germany. I typically would go to Heidelberg, and I'd buy a 230 SL or a 230 S, whichever one was available. And then I would drive. My plan was to take it all the way to Damascus. So I knew that in Damascus, they were paying a lot of money for these old Mercedes. They would put them in as taxis. So I would buy the car in Heidelberg. I would drive to either Vienna or Switzerland, and I would use American dollars to buy Romanian lei and get it for pennies on the dollar. Because in these days, the Eastern European currencies were artificially established. They weren't really well traded currencies. So,
yeah, they weren't traded on the market, so they were inflated. Basically, the state said it's 1 lei to the dollar, but the market said actually it's like 7,000 lei to the dollar. And so if I assume you're buying these lei on the black market at actual market rates, so you're loaded.
Right. Yeah, I've got stacks and stacks of money. And then I'd drive into the country, into Romania in particular, and then, basically go from house to house on these hillsides in the Transylvanian area. There was a little town called Vatra Dornea. Became friends with a school teacher there named what was his name? I can't remember, Parteni. And he would take me from house to house, and we would negotiate to purchase the women's dowry items, which primarily were these silk embroidered blouses, absolutely gorgeous blouses with thousands of hours of work on them, plus these vests that had fox fur trim on them, beaded belts. And I would buy those for almost nothing. I would pay, with my exchange, I would pay maybe $20 or $30 for these beautiful blouses. And I would just, I typically would buy $8,000 to $10,000 worth of these items and then hide it in the car. And from there, I would drive down to Athens and ship it all back to the U.S., or ship it to Monaco, depending on where I wanted to sell it.
I'm just going to pause you for a second. So $10,000 in 1970s money is $73,000, and this is in a communist country where the currency, that amount of money is what somebody probably maybe makes in a lifetime of work.
Oh, easily. Yeah. This was, and on top of that, there was hardly any cash in those communities. Everything was, government funded. They really had no cash available. So it was so much money. And not only that and the reason they did this is they really had no available cash to be able to buy things that they needed. Everything was a barter society. They would grow vegetables and fruits and make hay or or they would work, darning clothes or something. So this was a huge benefit for them.
This is the equivalent of if you live in the middle of a rural place in, let's say, the United States, and you don't have, for some reason, you're not making any actual cash. There's no Walmart. There's nothing near you. And some guy comes by and says, hey, 30 people or 50 people, I'm going to give you $1 million. And you can then take this to the city and buy all the things that you know, maybe don't even know exist, that would make your life easier. And you're going to take that deal even if you have to sell the suit you got married in or the thing you're making for someone, right? You're just going to go to work.
Exactly right. It was, people were so happy. They would greet us at their door. They would invite us in. They would give us all their specialties that they had saved up for the winter. It was, we would always celebrate at the end with this homemade plum brandy that they all kind of made. It was amazing. And of course, we got in trouble a couple of times.
I was going to say, how is the government? They want these people to be poor and dependent on the government. They don't want them to go, actually, we're rich and we don't have to take your shit anymore. That's not what communist authoritarian regimes want.
No. And while we got caught at the border one time, we had all the blouses stuffed underneath the seat of the back seat of the car. And these border guards would typically be looking for guns and cameras and things like that. And I remember one time leaving the country, and the border guard pressed on the back seats and realized it was harder than it should be. And you should have seen the look on his eyes. He goes, I've busted someone. And he flipped up the seat and all these silk blouses fell out. And the disappointment on his face, like, what in the world are you doing? But we did get caught by the police actually in the process of buying clothes up in the mountains. And
oh, wow.
It was quite an experience that taught me, forced me to learn how to be calm in the face of what could be, a life-changing, horrible experience.
Oh, yeah. Romanian prison in 1970, hard pass.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So they took us, they came to this little house where we had just been finishing a transaction. We had just gotten there, so the car was filled with all this cash. And, the biggest bill cost me $3 in those days. So, we had hundreds and hundreds of bills hidden in the car. But, if you looked, you would find them. So they had me go back to the car.
The largest Romanian currency note was worth $3, but you had stacks and stacks of that. Okay, those kind of bills. Got it.
Yeah. So they had their own police car. They said, okay, we're going to follow you to the main town, which was this one, Vatradornia. And then we're going to go into the station. We're going to search your car and, we're going to deal with this.
Oh, man.
And the one officer's going like this to us. So as we're driving, I had my former wife bag up all the money in a black plastic bag, which we carried a lot of because we would put the blouses in those. And as we're driving, it was a windy kind of mountain road. And so I knew the road pretty well. So I said, okay, get ready to throw it out the window as far as you can.
Oh my gosh.
And I sped up around a turn, got out of sight of the car following me, and had her throw it into the woods. Wow. And so when we got to the police station, they just had a few dollars, it wasn't very much money. I ended up giving the officer a camera and $300 in American money to let it go away. But they stamped our passports persona non grata. And when we went to go get that money back, because I couldn't just leave it, we were given, I think, 3 days to get out of the country.
So to clarify, persona non grata means you're not allowed to come back to this country. It's a stamp that says you're banned. It happens to My friend worked for the CIA in Egypt, and now he can never go back to Egypt because he's in their computer as persona non grata. It's called getting PNG'd. I'm actually surprised they bothered to do this because that officer got a massive payout of probably like 4 months or 6 months of his salary from you for doing literally nothing but harassing you. I'm surprised he didn't say, come back anytime, just stop here first and drop off a
Right.
couple $100 and we're good. I'll drive you to the border next time in my car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in this case, there was, he probably kept all that money to himself.
I'm sure he
and,
did.
And couldn't look like he was giving me a favor, especially since they hadn't found anything. But
Gotcha.
I'm just guessing. But we went back to go get the money, and we stopped by the side of the road where I knew it was, and about 20 yards in front of us were about 6 workmen working on the road. And this amount of money, like you were saying, would have set any one of those people up for life with enough money to live and never have to work again. But we did get the money, and we did not only smuggle it out of Romania, but eventually we exchanged passports. We changed our passports. And, remember, this is pre-computer. So the persona non grata went away with the old passports, which we destroyed. So now we not only smuggled it out, but we smuggled it back in. And lo and behold, we went to my friend Parteni, and he had been beaten up by the police after this whole event.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, authoritarian regimes are kind of famous for having crappy police that abuse people, right? I mean, that's what they do. That's their job in an authoritarian regime, is to abuse the citizenry. That's really kind of all they typically do, is enforce state policies against civilian population. There's not a whole lot of let me help you settle this dispute or other types of community policing as we might know it here. Now, this is such an interesting story. So you're smuggling the blouses and the money in and out, but what do you do with the blouses? You said you were selling the cowboy shirts in Paris. Where are the blouses going?
Yeah, mostly the blouses are selling on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. There was a store called Jax, Jax, and they would buy every single one I could get them, and they were being sold to, the Hollywood stars in the area of $300, $400, $500 a piece.
And you were buying them for how? What was the price of one of these that was being sold for $500 on Rodeo Drive?
On average, my cost was maybe $20, in that vicinity.
Solid markup. Yeah, that's really incredible. That's really incredible. You got to wonder if somebody listening right now is like, my grandma had this really interesting high-end blouse that we never kind of figured out what it was, but we could tell it was handmade. I mean, those got to still be floating around because these are really high quality. You can just tell the item is beautiful and handmade, and especially if it's one of the with the fur and stuff on it, those jackets. That's just really, really incredible. I'm surprised. Was that the only close call you had? I cannot imagine you only had one close call in the time that you were doing this, because the Eastern Bloc is not. It's not the Schengen visa zone where you can just drive around and they don't check you. I mean, this is the Soviet Union. This is the Eastern Bloc, right? I mean, this is the Iron Curtain.
Yeah, the only other time, there was little things here and there, but the only other time that was very memorable was when we were smuggling the money back. We were in Greece. We went to the consulate. We got a new passport. We were leaving Greece. And in those days, when you entered any of the European countries, they stamped in your passport the car you entered with, because there was such high sales taxes on cars. If you entered the country and sold it, they wanted to make sure you paid the sales tax. You couldn't just sell it for cash. So we had to exit Greece with our old passports and enter Bulgaria and Romania with the new passport that didn't have the persona non grata in it. And so when we got the border area between Greece and Bulgaria in those days had to be a couple miles wide on the road. So you were driving for 5 or 6 minutes on a road in a forest.
Okay, so this is to clarify. This is no man's land. So you're leaving Greece. There's a forest with literally nothing in it, probably some landmines or fence in the forest somewhere, and then you
Right.
end up at another checkpoint that says, "Why the hell are you here? What are you doing?" Because you're
Well,
not. Nobody enters the Eastern Bloc.
right. So, but before we entered Bulgaria, I wanted to get rid of the old passport
It's
that
a
had the
smart move.
persona.
Yeah.
So we stopped on the side of the road in the no man's land to destroy them. And I learned, just how hard that is. We ended up just burying them there, and then got to the immigration part, the customs for Bulgaria, and we're in our car. The Bulgarian officer comes up to the window, and I hand him my passports. He looks at me and says, "Ah, Mr. Lowe, we've been waiting for you."
Terrifying.
And, yeah, and my stomach just so. But it turned out what I hadn't seen is he had already looked at the passport and saw my name, and what he really wanted was a book in English. He said,
Oh.
he saw that I was nervous and upset, and he said, no, relax. I want to learn English. I wonder if you have a book in English. And my former wife was reading an Agatha Christie, and I grabbed it from her and gave it to him, and that was all he wanted. So
Wow,
we went
the bar is
on
pretty
our
low
merry way.
for the bribe, right? Like you stop right here until you give me a 99-cent used book
Right.
that I'm not going to be able to read. Just
Right.
unbelievable. Wow, that's
Yeah.
He didn't see you try to burn or bury your passports with what I assume is your bare hands in the middle of the forest down the road.
No. Apparently, no cameras existed.
Right, sure. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. You're so lucky, man. You're so lucky that you didn't go to prison for this at any time. Wow.
Well, there's lots of stories like that in the book. Lots of different adventures and stories, and in the book, what I'm trying to do at the end of each one is talk about, okay, what did I learn? How does that help me in my business career or in life in general? And so there's lots of different events like that.
Yeah, I mean, what did you learn from doing this? Obviously, the arbitrage opportunity is pretty obvious, right? Moving a blouse from one place where it's not that valuable by trading currency that's also super valuable and bringing it back to a place where currency is abundant, but the item is impossible to find. Okay, fine. But what else did you learn from this? I mean, it's just such an amazing cultural experience.
I think, there was all the attributes of calmness, all the attributes of, like not panicking and keeping your head in a situation where if you panicked, you would just make the situation worse. Also, the respect for other cultures, other backgrounds, other people, not only showing that respect, but really trying to learn, like, where are they coming from? What has made them the way they are? What's the historical background? What kind of environment do they live in? Because I just, if you take the time to listen and understand other people, you can create, amazing relationships and a kind of a better understanding of why people operate the way they do. And that all these experiences ingrained that in me.
It seems like you were adept at making some super high profile and powerful friends, especially in the book you talk about France. You're meeting all these, I can't remember who they were, but it's kind of like these old money, well-connected type folks. How did that happen? And is that skill or is that luck?
I would say it's at least half or more luck.
Okay.
Just being in the right place at the right time. But at the same time, like being open, being available to do things that, if you thought about too much, you wouldn't do. So, in southern France, I became friends, with Andy Warhol and Fred Hughes, his manager, and Nikki Weymouth whose father published some of the big papers like the London Times and others. But it was just it's
This is like knowing Banksy and Rupert Murdoch and just meeting them at a party. Like, oh yeah,
right. Yeah, it was some of these things only happened because I was a nobody. I lived in Monaco. I had some nice friends, but to meet Andy Warhol and Fred Hughes and Bob Colacello, who published the Interview magazine, it happened because I overheard that they needed someone to drive them from one villa to another in southern France. And I just put up my hand and said, I'll do it. And as a result, I got to be friends with them, hung out with them, became, definitely not an equal. I was like 18, 19 years old, but got to interact with them. And then, met this woman who I talk about in the book called Tamara de Lempicka, who is, one of the most famous Cubist painters. And so, a lot of these things happened because I was willing, to do things that, I lived in Monaco. Maybe driving people around might have been a lowly thing to do, but, I was always willing to pay my dues and do things to get to know people and get experiences like that.
Yeah, you hear about this. You hear about people saying, I can't remember who this was. A buddy of mine said something like, every time, I can't remember if it was Tony Robbins or something, he would figure out where he was going and he would say, this is years ago. I don't think he rolls this way anymore. But he'd go, I'll pick Tony Robbins up at the airport at whatever time you need, and I'll drive him to the hotel, and I've got a nice car, and it's going to be clean and all that. And I think Tony Robbins probably wasn't who he is now. And he said, sure, why not? I'll take a free ride from somebody who knows the town in their car. Now he's got his own jet, so probably he doesn't do this anymore. But yeah, it's the kind of thing where you'd make that opportunity for yourself deliberately, and then it turns out to be something that is very valuable to somebody else at that time.
Yeah.
I heard you ended up with a Warhol, a painting or a drawing or something along those lines.
Yeah. A print, a lithograph. And unfortunately, I lost it. I had, it was actually autographed by Andy to Mitch from Andy, which he hardly ever did. It was the Marilyn Monroe lithograph. And the reason he gave it to me and autographed it, which he hardly ever did, was because I went with them to all these villas with very wealthy people where Fred Hughes would sell them a custom Marilyn Monroe-like lithograph and of them personally.
So it was, I see.
So it was $25,000 a piece.
Wow.
If you got two, it was $35,000. And we would go from villa to villa, and Andy would take a photo, and then Fred would go, put it on a slide and put it against a frame and a what's a blank painting?
Canvas.
The linen canvas. Thank you.
Yeah.
Canvas. And then Andy would come in and paint. Put paint over it. And I would basically take them from place to place. I would do all those things to help them. But then when I was leaving my house, moving back to the US, leaving my apartment in Monte Carlo, I had this argument with my girlfriend who was taking over the rent in the place. And I totally forgot about this was in a roll under the bed. And, and so occasionally I'll look at auctions and look at various sales of Warhol lithographs. I still have never seen it out there on the market. But
yeah, wow. I mean, this guy was Warhol was charging $25,000 in 1970s money. This is $182,000 in today's money. So your autographed item was worth, for sure, much more than that, I would imagine. Much, much more than that.
Well,
so
yeah. I mean, it was
expensive breakup.
And I learned, at least I became aware of one of the most important lessons in life as a result of that. Is I found myself thinking and caring more about what I lost as opposed to being grateful for what I had. And I found this several times in my life where I'm focused on what I didn't get or what I got cheated out of or what I lost. And it's so stupid because, we should be thinking about how lucky we are for what we do have, family and health and, the good things.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically, I feel seen because I spend so much time going, oh, if I'd done this differently, or what if I'd done this earlier, I would be I'd be at X level right now. And my wife's like, what are you doing? Our kids are healthy. Your families, both of our sets of parents are alive. They're here right now visiting us. You got a full house. Everybody's happy. You're sitting here being like, why isn't my YouTube bigger? I mean, it's so dumb, right?
Yeah,
it's dumb. It's a dumb way to live.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to get over, but
It is.
But it is absolutely true.
Tell me about getting deported from Egypt. Sounds like you're almost like Forrest Gumping through history here you're just sort of touching these little people, places, and events.
Yeah. So in this whole kind of 3-leg tour from Romania to Damascus, the third stop was Cairo. And in Cairo, I would go to the market, which is called the Kanakahili market. And in the market, I became friends with this group of craftsmen that made applique tents. They were mostly used for big parties, like 20-foot by 15-foot canvases with sewn on arabesque designs. So they'd look like the inside of mosques when you looked up at the ceiling, but they were material. They were hand sewn on.
Is it like an awning type of thing?
Exactly. It's awnings but with side panels. So they would essentially make a big party room with the walls and the ceiling made from these canvas.
I'm imagining like a yurt type of thing. Is it like that?
But it was cube. It was like a cube.
Okay.
So 4 sides and a top, and then carpets thrown on the ground. So I became friends with these guys, and I thought, I could sell these to restaurants, especially in the San Francisco area and Sausalito, and sell them as party tents as well. So we became friends, and then one day, one of their customers came in, and his name was Nasser Salam, and his father, we became friends. His father was the mayor of a suburb of Cairo called Heliopolis, very wealthy suburb. And Nasser was an amateur photographer. And one of my best friends in Monaco was a professional photographer. His name was Claude Vacareza. And so Claude and I one time went to Egypt. We were hanging out with Nasser. And he said, why don't we go out into the desert and we'll take some beautiful desert photos. I had a big telephoto lens, Nasser did, and so did Claude. And we were driving on the south east side of Cairo, not 100 miles, but maybe 80 miles south. And we looked ahead of us and we saw along the ground dust, like a whole train of dust. And we started looking through our telephoto lenses, and thank God we didn't take a photo, but we saw trucks carrying pontoons heading east. And within a minute or two, we got surrounded by military police, just came out of nowhere, grabbed our cameras, took us to their base, and started developing and said, we're going to, this is pre-digital. So they said, we're going to develop this film. And if there's any photos, you're going to be in big trouble. And of course, thank God Nasser was with us with political clout because, he was able to call his father and his father got involved. And when they developed the film, thank God there was nothing on it. And so they said, okay, you and Claude are leaving the country right now. We're taking you to your hotel, which was the Hilton Hotel in Cairo. We packed up all our stuff and they took us straight to the airport and put us on the first flight out of there.
Wow.
Which was a Middle East Airlines flight to, of all places, Damascus, which is not the place you wanted to be heading. What was more funny is Claude had bought I think it was a 6-foot tall hookah pipe that fortunately came into 2 pieces and was like 3 feet tall, wrapped up in paper. And so he had to carry that on the flight as well. But
why did they deport you to Syria? That's so they just said whatever the first flight is because we don't want to sit at the airport.
Yeah, whatever the first flight is, you're getting on it.
Oh my gosh.
Well, and lo and behold, the following day, those pontoon bridges made the surprise attack on Israel crossing the Suez, and
yeah, no wonder they didn't want you taking photos.
Right. So while we're in Damascus, the war is starting, and the airports are getting bombed, and the news, especially being on the Arab side, was I remember the headline was Bar-Lev line smashed. Bar-Lev was the general that set up a kind of a concrete wall along Sinai to protect Israel, because remember, Israel controlled Sinai in those days. And so the Bar-Lev line was what Israel always thought would stop the Arabs, the Egyptians, from invading through Sinai. So the headlines on the Arab side were Bar-Lev line smashed, Tel Aviv in 3 days. And that was the environment we spent the next week. Of course, the whole thing changed. I believe it was Moshe Dayan or another general went behind, kind of snuck around the Egyptian lines and came at them from behind and cut their supply lines. So
this is the beginning of the Yom Kippur War.
Mm-hmm.
Also, some people call it the Ramadan War, 1973. And this was a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria all attacked Israel at the same time.
Right.
And Israel pushed them all back in kind of these surprise maneuvers. So that must have been, I would not want to be I would not have wanted to be in either of those places at that time. I mean, that must have been very scary. Were you scared at all, or are you still so naive that you're just not paying attention to anything?
I think so naive. It just, like the possibilities, especially I was very nervous, at that base, while they're developing the film, because I didn't know what the next step was. And when we got to Damascus, remember, I had a lot of friends there, but we had to get out of Syria. It was not a safe place for us to be. And Claude's father worked for the Red Cross, but we had to get to Beirut for him to be able to help us. So
even less safe than Syria during that war.
Well, it became less safe, especially during the civil war that started shortly after that in Lebanon. But we had to pay a Syrian taxi driver to sneak us across the border, going up all these little mountain roads over the Baalbek Mountains between, it's not a long distance. It's maybe 100 miles between Damascus and Beirut. But to get there, we had to go way north and over these dirt roads and got us to Beirut.
That is not an adventure you want to have outside of your 20s, man.
No.
Like that.
No. Especially when you have a family and, commitments and responsibilities.
No, this is, I mean, at the time it's probably like, oh, this is kind of exciting, but we should probably leave. Now that's like, what am I, you're questioning your life decisions at that point if you're in anything over 30. Wow. I mean,
right.
What are you learning from all the twists and turns at this point in your life?
Just, how unpredictable, things can be, how crazy the world is, how, people are doing things to each other that just is, in a way, unimaginable. Again, learning to respect all these different, despite, finding all kinds of things wrong with these, kind of political ideas and so on, just also at the same time coming to respect the majority of the people in those countries and appreciating, what they've developed and their history. But it really became clear to me that there was no way to get for anything to be clear, black and white. Everything was on a gray level and always depended on where you were coming from, who you were and where you came from, modified how you thought about things so much on the very same subject that both people could be right, but on the opposite side.
Yeah, that realization, especially from somebody in the 1970s, 1980s, I mean, that'll make you a divergent thinker. Even me traveling in the 90s I'd come back and I'd say something and people would look at me like I'm an alien because I'm not just taking their born in Michigan. I was born in Michigan, the United States. Most people I knew had never traveled. They had one perspective. It was kind of all the same. And I'd say, well, actually, when I was in Germany or / Europe, whatever, we would do this. And I realized I was probably that guy for a while among my friends. Like, right. Okay, here he goes again. But I also just had so many different ideas. And when I went to college, I remember professors and teaching assistants being like, hey, you really do think about things in a different way. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time that had been seen as good and not just purely annoying for everybody around me.
Right.
I want to shift gears a little bit because you did start several movie-related companies, and that's kind of what we were originally going to talk about. But I wanted to get your, not childhood, but young adult life in because it's so interesting. There's just so much there. But you became this movie fanatic, and you started, for lack of a better word, pirating, copying a bunch of movies that you rented from some poor video chain near you in California. And knowing that little throwaway factoid, it's kind of, it maybe doesn't have a lot of meaning. However, it sounds like you basically always wanted video on demand, even if you had to make it yourself, which I guess you ended up doing, except later you ended up making it for everybody. And we just call it Netflix now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I always loved TV shows in particular. My brother and I would come home from school. We were, I'm thinking like 3rd grade to 8th grade. Our parents were working, so we would just flick on the television and watch things like Get Smart and F Troop, and I just was entranced and calmed by watching, these stories, and just, I don't know, it was just something I really, really always loved. And as I, started thinking about it as a business, I realized that there was, all these shortcomings. What you really wanted, which of course leads to streaming, is you want to watch what you want to watch, when you want to watch it, on whatever device you want to watch it on. You want that total freedom. And what that results in is, some of it is just mind-numbing relaxation, but a lot of it is opening your eyes to all these things I talk about culture, about all these different cultures, is to watch and get engrossed in a good story is filled with lessons and filled with ideas that expand your thinking and hopefully make you a more tolerant and understanding and educated person. And that to me just always, while I never thought the technology would come as fast as it did, that was always kind of where I was headed.
Later, you invest in this video store. You say it was the first of a string of terrible investments, which I think is really funny because, of course, we've kind of all been there. It's like the more you play, the more terrible investments you end up making. Story of everybody's life in business. And the guy who ran it, well, it sounds like he had other hobbies that maybe distracted him from running the business.
Yeah, it was, this is all pre-computer. So transactions are all on paper. It's a total cash business. No one's using credit cards. I think there was checks, but most of it was cash. And the store, this particular store was doing incredible business, but there was 4 partners. They would take turns, who was running the store, on this day or that shift. And it turned out like splitting the profits was never enough, for at least one or maybe two of the partners. I never really knew how many of them were, but essentially they were siphoning off money for their own gain, and eventually drove the store, which at the time was doing $500,000 a year in 1,000 square feet.
Wow.
And this is 82. So I'm sure it's at least more than $1 million.
Sure. I'm going to do that calculation right now. That's $1.5 million in today's money. It's incredible.
Incredible. 1,000 square feet, was packed all the time. And of course, I was one of those customers. As you said, I would buy both blank tape and rent movies. And then I had 2 VCRs at home. I would make copies, not because I was selling the copies. I just wanted to be able to watch it when I wanted to watch it, as opposed to in that short 1 or 2 or 3 day window before I had to return it. So, and in fact, years later, we threw all those cassettes away. And I don't think, maybe I watched 1 or 2 of the hundreds I made.
Yeah, that checks out. I burned hundreds of DVDs so I'd have a movie library. And then eventually I was just like, oh, some of these don't even work. And then it's like ... Netflix comes out, and I just like, oh, man. And then I trashed everything. Yeah, it was a waste of time. I got you. It's a story of many people who copy a lot of movies,
right.
or copy a lot of software, and you got all these things, and you just realize, oh, I don't friggin' need these. This is obsolete now. Whoops. But the clunkiness of video rentals, the distrust of retail video rental from studios, and the artists don't want it. The studios think it's going to be a problem. It sounds like you learned a lot from this and saw how the sausage was made. And it sounds like Netflix and later Redbox are largely an answer on how to clean up this gigantic tangled mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There was, in any kind of nascent business, there's always what kind of business terms do we make our product available, both from the movie creator, producer, as well as the retailer. And then, of course, it all filters down to the customer. So prior to the early 80s, the only people who had a movie library at home were the movie moguls, the big producers who made movies, and they might have it on a big projector or something like that. So the studios had to, how do we rent these things? How do we sell these? And rental was not what they wanted. They were concerned about copying, which they were very right to feel. They were worried about piracy, people copying and then selling those. They just had huge concerns about, how do I protect this asset that my company has invested a lot into? And that is true whether you were a star who earned revenue in a revenue share deal, or the studio that owned the content. So initially, they were very angry about this law that we have in the U.S. Called first sale. And first sale is what generated the Sony case, where Sony was sued, or Betamax was sued by the studios, because the studios thought by making these VCRs available, you're essentially aiding and abetting copying of this valuable content. And so the studios only wanted sales, but the first sale laws in the US say, unless there is an exception made, which there is for books and music and computer software and a few other things, the manufacturer, when they sell it, they are selling all the rights to do whatever you want with it, including rental for revenue. So, for example, Hertz never had to pay Ford every time they rented a Ford car.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
They bought the car, or you could buy brooms and turn around and rent them and never pay the manufacturer. Now, some industries like computer software and music and books got an exemption from Congress saying, okay, the first sale exists, but you can't do it with music. And their argument was, it's too easy to copy and then resell. It's too easy to kind of affect our business. And they weren't
Wait till
able.
you guys learn about the internet. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that was still years ahead. This was in the early 80s. So it was that whole era, especially the 80s, was, first of all, how much will customers pay for a box that can play a movie? There was a Beta machine put out by Sony, and then a VHS. Beta failed because Beta was only 1 hour. The tapes were only 1 hour long, even though it was higher quality. VHS came out with a 2-hour cassette and took over. Even though Beta within months came out with a 2-hour also, the writing was already on the wall. So they were working out formats, how much would people pay, what were the studios going to provide the content. There was all kinds of boycotts happening. Warner put out these movies in a blue box that you had to pay Warner every time you rented it, the video store. So there was there was even companies that put out cassettes that had a little lock inside of them where they would only play 20 times and then the cassette would lock. And of course, everybody figured out how to unlock it.
Yeah, you probably need like a paper clip to undo that. Yeah.
Yeah. There was even a cassette that had some chemical inside of it that after a certain amount of play would destroy the tape.
Oh my gosh.
That even was the case in the early days of DVD. A company put out a DVD that after a certain amount of plays, the reader could not read. It basically turned the surface into an opaque, unreadable disc.
Oh my gosh.
So it was just a period of, learning and, figuring out what are the right, business relationships between all the parties.
Why did you name the company Netflix? Why name the company Netflix if you're mailing DVDs originally? You would have to know that at some point the company's going to eventually deliver movies over the internet, but you're barely in the DVD age itself.
Yeah. It was, kind of it was a collaborative kind of thinking group that operated under Mark Randolph, who basically ran the store. So he ran the website and all those things. And, we started out calling the company Kibble, and that was kind of our stealth name. And, the whole theory about stealth names is you want to name yourself something you would never use once you roll out.
Right.
So,
like a name that sounds like a dog food company, which is what that sounds like.
And I remember Mark used to say about the product, the dogs will eat. So he played upon the kibble. But then there was, I seem to remember a company that was hired who was a professional kind of company namer. And they recommended movies by mail, which was more representative of what we actually did. And everybody thought, well, we don't know how or when, but we know eventually we're going to be either downloading or streaming content. We didn't know when the studios would give us the rights. We didn't know when the broadband would be big enough, and we didn't know whether the studios would prefer downloading versus streaming, because they each have their impact on piracy.
Sure.
So Netflix came out of a small group that worked with Mark and just brainstormed putting names on a chalkboard, and eventually came out with that. Some people say, and I'm a believer in this, that it came from a visit to Paris, where the executives were meeting with the Louis Vuitton, the LVMH group, to invest, and they overheard someone say "flicks" as a word for movies. and net came from internet. And that's how I believe the name evolved. But it was really the group working with Mark just brainstorming hundreds of different names and rejecting the movies by mail idea.
How did you even know you could mail DVDs without them breaking? I've tried to do that before, mail CDs, mail DVDs. They always arrive scratched. They're cracked. That's not even counting mail getting lost, which happens all the time, especially back in the day.
Well, when I first met Mark Randolph, when he had this idea of mailing movies, I'd say half of his questions to me, and remember, DVD now is only 4 months old in the market at the time. Almost half of his questions were, do you think a DVD would break if we sent it through the mail? And of course, I had no idea at the time that first class mail rolled over a metal roller.
Yeah, and it gets freaking destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah, literally wrapped around it. And so I in my normal way, I said, yeah, I think it could. I think it'll work. I think you could do it. Really not knowing, but I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah, confidently incorrect. Yeah.
Confidently incorrect. And my brother and I had a home delivery service that we were advising in the Central Valley at the time. So, we thought this home delivery idea, but, in the early days of Netflix, there was one room where we had all these experiments with replicating what the DVD went through at the U.S. Post Office. We had a metal dowel that was the same size as the U.S. Post Office with weights holding the DVD down. Ultimately, the solution was incredibly interesting. If you remember how in DVDs you usually had a silk screen of the title and some legal stuff on one side of the disc. I don't know if you remember that.
You mean just the what's printed on the disc itself?
Yeah. Which that was silk screened usually on
okay.
there. But what in all these experiments, what the thing they learned was if it had that, it was more likely to break. And if you could buy enough copies and convince the studio not to put that artwork on the disc, on one side of the disc itself, you could greatly improve its survivability in the U.S. Post Office. And ultimately, that's what happened is the studios agreed for Netflix not to put, not everyone, because there wasn't enough copies purchased, but for all the big titles, ultimately they got the studios not to put the silk screen on, and that dramatically improved the survivability.
That's so funny. Just what a weird tweak, right? Hey, this is making the disc more brittle for some reason. Don't put it on there. The amount of testing you have to do to figure that out and then scale it and then ask studios to make a product differently when they kind of maybe already hate you a little bit. What a uphill battle that had to be.
Well, Netflix really established this culture of test and learn, and really had amazingly smart, because test and learn is a complex process. You have to have enough variability. You have to follow, what you learn in each one, and then continue to support ongoing tests. And I think whether it's the quality of the content or the content that was purchased, Netflix succeeded a lot because of that culture that was created there.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. Okay, so once you figure out I can mail DVDs, they're not going to crack, scratch, they're going to get lost, but there's nothing you can do about that. I assume at some point there's just a certain amount of this never made it, this got destroyed, and you're just building that in. Like 10% of DVDs are going to just never arrive or arrive in 5 pieces.
Yeah, there was those kind of 3 or 4 big buckets of problems in mailing DVDs, cracking, scratching, not playing, in the early days, all DVDs did not play well on every DVD player. There was still a lot of the technology being worked on, and different companies were using different scripting languages for chapters and so on. So it wasn't like we got to a certain point and everything was solved. It was in every one of these kind of negative factors, whether it was, hurting the profits or hurting the customer experience, there was constant kind of testing and solving that went on, and all, at different paces.
Sure. Yeah. It's some of the solving you did with not only Netflix, but with Redbox, which we'll get to in a second, is really detailed. One genius idea, and it seems this is the genius of the idea, is it's so obvious after you do it, but when you did it, nobody else was doing it. You put a coupon in almost every DVD player that you contacted these manufacturers and said, hey, people are going to buy this and then not have any DVDs. So you need to make your product useful. We need people to sign up for Netflix. Here's a coupon for a free rental or a free month of rentals or whatever it was. I mean, did the strategy seem obvious at the time, or was this just one of those things you pop that just happened to pop off?
Well, it was, really Mark was a marketing genius. He recognized that there was this issue in that people getting DVD players wanted something to put in them. Otherwise, it was a waste of time. And my connections with the DVD studios and with the manufacturers told me they also had a big problem. They were getting a lot of pushback from their retail accounts saying, hey, Blockbuster only has a small selection in very few locations, and people just don't want to shell out $20 to buy a movie to watch one time. So, so it ended up being like that classic easy deal to make happen, as long as we were subsidizing all the costs of the rentals. And there was a lot of competition between the DVD manufacturers. We started out before, because we started this before subscription. So typically we would give 8 free rentals on this coupon. So you got codes that gave you 8 free 1-week rentals. And then you had companies like Sony saying, hey, but we're the big kahuna in the business. We want 10. And then you had, Toshiba, which was backed by Warner, saying, yeah, but, our partner Warner is supplying all the movies, so we want 10. So there was a lot of back and forth. And it was easy to get these inserted. We shipped them all to Japan, where all the players were being manufactured in those days before they shifted to China. And these guys would just, slide them into the manual bag, that little plastic bag, or put them right on top. But then the retailers, also wanted a piece of the action. They wanted, and this actually ended up being the most effective, they wanted their salespeople on the floor to have a coupon as a bonus, as a plus. And so, we had everybody from, Best Buy to Circuit City to, Target, every retailer and every manufacturer was giving away these first free rentals and then eventually a free month of Netflix.
There's somebody somewhere who worked at Best Buy who stole a stack of those and is still getting free Netflix 10 years later from all of the scratch-off codes or whatever that he's got sitting in his office. Because that's a lot of free DVDs. I mean, you're giving away free DVD rentals with the player, and then the person bought it at the store, so they get another 5 or whatever, and it's just like, that adds up fast. But I guess if you get a customer, you get a customer.
Well, and that's the whole thing, is that there is a real science to this. The science is, what is your ROI on all this cost? Because you might get, first of all, you're not going to have everybody redeem it. But then of those who redeem it and get the free rentals, and this was our big challenge when it was a la carte, everybody would take the free rentals and then never come back. They would go, okay, now I've gotten my fill. Now I'll go to the video stores, which were at that time starting to put more inventory into their stores. So then once we switched to subscription, it was like, how many, should it be a 1 month? Should it be a 2 week? At what point does the customer decide this is for me and it's worth paying for? And then what are they willing to pay and for what? And so we started out, you get 4 movies at a time for $19.95, and you get a free month to try it out. And it turned out that 4 at a time, you could have watched 30 or more movies in the month, and we were paying not only $1.10 roughly to ship it and get it back, but in addition, we were paying rev share on some titles. We had to pay the cost of the DVD initially, which was between $15 and $18.
Oh, wow.
And after 3 or 4 rental, if people kept it 2-3 weeks, by the end of the second or third rental, no one, everybody moved on to the next big hit title.
Right. Oh, man.
So there was so many moving parts trying to figure out how exactly do you get people to want to come back and pay, and how much does it cost us to, per, converted, as we used to call them, customer.
Well, you ended up with a lucky break. I'm putting this in radio air quotes here, because you had the Monica Lewinsky scandal generate this massive email list for the company. Tell me this story, because this is so ridiculous. It's shocking that it worked the way that it did.
It was a crazy idea. And one of the things I always enjoyed doing is putting together ideas from one person totally unrelated to our business with a need in our business. And a guy who was a friend, he was a distributor of Polish content in the United States to video stores, had this harebrained idea that we could prove that you could make a DVD in record time. And in those days, it actually took 3-4 months to actually make a DVD to get to the point where you could manufacture. The master was called a silver disc. And part of this was because different players use different technologies, as I was saying earlier. And so he had this idea, because he was friends with a company in Sunnyvale that said they had figured out a kind of a universal language to create that master DVD with chapters and so on. And they thought they could do it in 24 hours.
So this is like a standardized format that would work on any DVD player, as opposed to like the gymnastics you had to do before.
Yeah, this was their theory. It actually wasn't exactly true. And so right at the same time, I was thinking, okay, what can we test this on, and what good does it do us at Netflix just to prove you can make a DVD? That would be more relevant to the studios and the manufacturers. Right at that same time, I was reading that President Clinton was going to give testimony before Congress on the Monica Lewinsky issues, that he lied, et cetera. And then Mark said, well, isn't that public domain? Can't we just record that content or get it from a TV news station and make it into a DVD? And I checked all the different constituents involved, and yes, we could do that. So that's exactly what we did. And when we made it, this whole thing was happening so fast. We didn't know what we were going to do. Were we going to sell it? Were we going to put it in our rental library? It could really be considered our first exclusive content, and from that respect, which, today, soaks up $18 to $20 billion a year. And so the whole idea evolved to, well, let's give it away. Let's give it away to build up this subscription list, or a list of potential future customers. And that's ended up being this huge campaign that had all kinds of problems involved in making it work.
At one point, you thought you were sending the Monica Lewinsky thing, but you ended up sending something quite different to a bunch of your customers?
The first issue we came across is you can't actually give something away for free and get someone's credit card information. And which we wanted, because the idea is get this DVD for free and become a member. But to become a member, you needed a credit card. So we came up with this idea of just charging 2 cents. That was enough to be able to process the credit card. And it worked really cleverly into this statement, which was give us your 2 cents, which is, classic. Give me your thoughts on this idea. And in the whole process, this was like I think a 96 hours, 72 hours of non-sleep, going back and forth between, this company in Sunnyvale and then back to the office in Los Gatos. In fact, no, it was in Scotts Valley, so over Highway 17 towards the beach. Lots of driving back and forth. And meanwhile, we had not identified a manufacturer who was going to take this silver platter and turn it into DVDs and do it quickly. So we called around, and we found a company in Fremont, California that said, yep, bring us the silver platter and we'll start pressing them right away. Well, we brought it over. They said, come back in a couple hours later. And we were racing because by this time, Mark had gotten a huge story on this in the Wall Street Journal. And we were getting flooded, with orders. I think it ended up being tens of thousands of orders for the title. And so we're racing back and forth, and I grabbed the first batch of the DVDs and get them back to the office so they could put them in the envelopes. The first thing someone noticed was instead of it saying Clinton on the hub where they would etch in the title, it said Clinton without the N, Cliton. And okay, I thought nothing of it. About 3-4 days later, we started getting, I think someone sent us an email or something. They said, okay, now I get the, why the hub said Clinton and not Clinton. This has porn on it. And we go, oh my God. And I went back to the manufacturer, and sure enough, they not only made our DVD, but they were one of the big porn DVD manufacturers in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I happened to have grabbed a stack, which typically is 100 discs per stack. So I must have grabbed a couple of those and mixed them in.
Oh man, it's like this isn't a typo. It really is just Cliton. That you grabbed the 100 copies of Cliton or whatever. Oh my gosh.
We like all good retailers that make a mistake. We reached out to all our customers. We didn't know who got what. One of the big challenges with DVDs, which later we solved at Redbox, was how do you put an identifier on the disc itself to identify that actual unit. And in those days, this was, prior to being able to do that. So we didn't know, which 200 people got the porn disc. So we reached out to everybody who we sent it to saying, we'll send you the right one, just send us that back. And I think we never got, in fact, I'm sure we never got one returned to us. They are in the market as collector's items now.
That's really funny. So you're like, hey, look, we're really sorry for anybody who's offended. We accidentally sent out some X-rated material. Feel free to send it back. And people are like, no, I'm going to go ahead and hang on to this because I can't. I'll just put this in the back of my DVD stack.
Right.
Just in case.
I may watch it sometime in the future.
It is kind of funny that the first Netflix exclusive or Netflix original was a BJ speech by President Clinton and or some hardcore porn, depending on what you accidentally got in the mail.
It's somehow it's like the connections are too good to be completely accidental.
Right. It's like Lindsay Lohan holiday movie. Dang, I was hoping for something a little racier. Yeah.
Right. The Parent Trap.
Yeah, different. Yeah, talk about typos. Yeah, there's anyway. I'm gonna get in trouble if I keep going in that thread. All right, so the the iconic red envelope at some point is then born, and I remember seeing these all through college and maybe even through law school or both. And eventually, people like me, I started to wonder what the heck is that? I see my friends have these laying around everywhere. That had to have been some of your best advertising early on because I just remember seeing those ubiquitously all over campus and everybody had it. And I remember going, what is this? What's Netflix? What is this? And and everyone had a DVD player on their computer at that point, kind of, on their laptop or there was one in the lounge for the students. And you could get DVDs from the library. So I just thought, like, this is such a brilliant idea because everybody knows this color. It's like this crimson or whatever that the movies come in.
Right. Yeah. People would go into friend's house and see these, stacked on their TV or somewhere in the house and ask, what is that? It's almost the same as seeing a long line in front of a restaurant or a place and going, boy, I better check that out. Some people, a lot of people think it's a great idea. What was really, I think one of the real interesting things was I ran into one day my postman who was delivering mail. I happened to go out, remember we used to all have those boxes, those doors you open up. And I went out there just as he was delivering. And he said, boy, have you seen all these red envelopes? And I go, yeah, I work for that company. And he said, a bunch of us at the post office are going to invest because we're seeing them everywhere. And so the postmen and women were some of the first people to recognize that there was this movement, this wave of a fantastic new product. Remember, this is like prior to social media. This isn't, something that got talked about a lot, but the postmen and women really recognized the flood of envelopes.
That's funny. They're on the front lines and they're going, whatever this company is, they're selling a lot of these or rent. They probably didn't know exactly what was going on. There's so many of these. I'm delivering thousands of these every week. This is this is an idea that's caught on. And besides you guys, they were probably some of the first people to actually see that your business was successful, which is pretty funny if you think about it.
Yeah, definitely more aware than a lot of people in the finance industry or the entertainment business.
Right. And even I guess your sort of finance people, they've got to wait for the monthly numbers or the quarterly numbers. The Postal Service people are like, nope, I've seen 10,000 of these in my truck every single week for the last 3 months, 2 months. Like they're really kind of on the day to day, which is funny.
Right. And growing.
Yeah. Like last month I had 500 of these. Now I got 1,000. And the week after that, it's 10,000 or 5,000. I mean, it's just like at some point they're seeing crates of these show up. You got to focus on faster and faster delivery at some point eventually, because it seems like back then, it seems like waiting for the Postal Service to deliver your product is pretty fraught. We talked about breakage, but it's also something you don't control. You could never control. Anything can go wrong. Best case scenario is 1 to 3 days, and you don't even know. I'm thinking, how do they know if I'm renting this movie and keeping it, or if it just never reaches me? Because of course I'm not going to say, hey, I'm stealing your product. I'm going to say, I never got this thing. So at some point you got to be thinking, we're going to wait for the internet to catch up so we can stream movies, right? Was that kind of the solution?
There was, at that time, so we're talking like 2002, let's say 2002, the internet seemed much farther away. The ability to stream or download seemed way too far in the future. The studios were being pretty adamant that they were never going to let their valuable content be open to that kind of piracy, which they all believed that streaming or download would cause. And so we took very seriously this idea of faster delivery. And the way it came to light initially was that when you looked at the market share, so we were able to identify how many DVD households there were by markets. So San Francisco, New York, et cetera. And it was based on sales data that we got from an organization that represented DVD player manufacturers. So when we compared the number of our subscribers to the installed base, one thing, stuck out like huge, and that was we had roughly a 5% market share in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was like a 0.25%, a 0.5% at best in other major markets. And in our mind, we weren't sure what the cause of that was. We had three big ideas. One of them was how long it took to ship. Those markets that were lower were 2 and 3 day ship markets. In San Francisco, we had a warehouse in San Jose. You could probably get your DVD the next day, whereas the rest of the market was 2. So we thought, okay, maybe it's the 1 day ship. But the argument was, but the Bay Area is a high tech community. They catch on to these things. They're early adopters, et cetera. We, of course, third was we all had lots of friends that we had told about it. We had a full page ad in April of 2018 in the San Francisco Chronicle that talked about, I was all funded by Warner Brothers, promoting our first 2 titles, which were LA Confidential and Boogie Nights.
Oh yeah.
And those were so we had all these different ideas. Eventually, through more research, we did find that it was how long it took to get it. There was this kind of change in what you wanted to watch from the time you ordered it to the time you got it. You ordered a comedy. Actually, I'm not in the mood. I want a drama. And so, we had different ideas. One of them was to put kiosks in grocery stores all over the country so you could return your DVDs and pick up new ones just at your regular shopping. And the average American goes to the grocery store 2.6 times a week. So that was like, an easy idea. And we started a stealth project called Netflix Express. And we tested it in Las Vegas. And it was enormously successful, but other problems.
This actually makes a lot of sense because I was going to ask about Redbox, which is those box people see. They're the boxes, vending machines, essentially, that people see outside, let's say a 7-Eleven. And I thought, why would you do Redbox when you're already doing Netflix? Because a lot of people, I think, don't realize that these are 2 separate markets that exist at the same time. But also, since Netflix was mailing things, Redbox actually made even more sense because it was at least instant, more or less. Whereas now, if you're streaming everything, it's like, who goes to rent a DVD? Who's doing this? And the answer is, well, before, everyone. And now there's still a market for that, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah. So we had these 3 ideas. One of them is to put kiosks called Netflix Express all over the place so it was convenient. The second one, which was a very clever idea, you remember when you put a movie in your queue, we would prioritize that list based on what was in inventory. So when we got a disc back, you'd get the next highest ranked one. And we thought, you know what? It takes a day for those people in New York. It would take 2 days for that disc to get back to us. And then if someone else in New York wanted it, it would take another 2 days to get to them. So we thought, what if we pre-print the return part of the envelope with the name and address of the person who's got it in their queue after you? In other words, cut out the return to our warehouse and ship it, directly from Joe, who lives in Manhattan, to Steve that lives in Brooklyn, instead of
like a chain letter.
Yeah, exactly. But And we devised an envelope that now had 3 mailings, had 3 envelopes associated with it. So after Steve was done with it, it would come back to the warehouse. What we didn't realize after a test was now we're telling people private information about someone else rented. So we had to kill that.
And I don't want my address on Steve's envelope, and it's like, oh, I
Right.
know Jordan Harbinger. Wow, he's renting the same Monica Lewinsky porn tapes as I am from Netflix. That's interesting. No, I know you didn't send smut on purpose, but still, I don't want somebody to know. What if there's a celebrity that has their address on there, and I'm like, whoa, Megan
Yeah.
Fox is getting this after me. I'm just gonna walk over there. Yeah,
Exactly. So that idea failed. The Netflix Express idea, we ended up shutting down, even though we were signing up thousands of customers at grocery stores in Las Vegas. The problem is, without the delay of the post office and the whole kind of process you went about picking your movies, people were watching 15, 16 movies a month on average, from grocery store subscribers. So that was killing us financially when you're charging $19.95 and you're giving away $19 worth of postage stamps. So the third idea, which was kind of the no-brainer and still exists today for Netflix, is build mini warehouses all over the country to get most of the country in a one-day ship. But the challenge was, and I learned a lot about this challenge that took me to Redbox, because each kiosk for Redbox is kind of a mini warehouse, repeated many, many times. But the trick was, how do you allocate, especially the new releases, which were like fresh fruit in that no one wants them after 3 or 4 weeks. How do you position just the right number? So that ended up being the solution. And it got everybody, one day. It got 90% or so of the customers within a one-day ship.
This kind of business is so complicated. I was thinking about this because one of the big hangups with Redbox was the fact that, okay, the transaction takes a long time. You got people waiting in line to get movies from the box at the grocery store, but they've got bags of food. And then people who want to return a movie have to wait in the same line. And it's like, I just want to put this stupid thing back, and I got to wait behind this guy who's looking at 17 different selections. And then it's like, let's put a return slot on the side. So the returns go on one side and the people getting the other one. But then it's like I'm choosing a movie and someone's like right here, 3 inches away from me, trying to put the thing. And it's like, and you've got to test for all that stuff at great expense. You're manufacturing different versions of this machine that can accept the movies, and you got to get data on what's working. And like you said, okay, this store in Santa Clara, wherever, California, how many editions of John Wick 2 do we need to have in there before people are like, this never has anything, versus now we have too many in there and we can't fit the other movies people want, or we don't have enough to put in at the one down the road. I mean, it's just the amount of data you have to crunch to get that. It seems like an impossible calculus problem.
Oh, it was, and the most fascinating challenge I've ever, and of course, I wasn't the math scientist on this, but I had 17 analysts focused solely on this who were just amazing. They've all of them have gone on to, great careers in the analyst world. But just to give you one crazy metric is first we were opening a new kiosk every single hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 years in a row. Now, what that meant is that we were generally, it was about 8,200 or so per year.
Oh, God, that's so many. Holy smokes.
We were manufacturing them, we were shipping them, installing, and then manning them, operating them all internally. And so what that meant is every hour after the first year or so, we were generally opening a new kiosk that competed with an existing one and siphoned off part of the customer base. And so this calculation of how many copies to put, in the 7-Eleven on the right side of the road in Denver, and then how many to put in the Smith store on the left side of the road, when the Smiths didn't exist, up until today, became a huge, incredible calculation. But what was crazier is 43% of all the movies were rented in one location and returned to another. So we not only had to deal with how many you'd put in there initially, but you had to calculate how many were going to go to another location and where. And that, if these movies just kept renting and renting and renting, it wouldn't be an issue. But generally, new releases were, there was typically 3 or 4 big hit titles every week that came out. And 3 weeks after they came out, hardly anyone, 90% demand drop. And so if you didn't get it right, you basically were out of luck. You couldn't generate any revenue.
This is I mean, that's crazy. I didn't even think about that. If they can return the movie to a different location, now you have to kind of have some sort of model that predicts the future, use and adjust, like an algorithm based on return data. It's almost that seems even more difficult than the stuff we just talked about. I mean, that's crazy. And then, of course, if there's one common return location because it's, I don't know, convenient somehow, now you've got, and this is a 30,000 7-Eleven parking lot. Do you have somebody who goes, okay, this machine is full of returns. We got to drive someone over there and spread them out through the area because now that machine has a bunch of returns it can't service and the other ones are empty.
Yeah, there was we had a working theory to do that, but the cost of sending someone to a location, having it clear which ones to take out, where to put them was way too costly. So we had to do this all with the kind of the foresight of analytics. And, several really interesting themes took place. First of all, there was, what type of spot is it located in? Is it a grocery store? Is it a convenience store? Is it like a Walgreens? Is it a Walmart? That had specific demographics with specific tastes in mind, and specific patterns of behavior of how often they would shop at that location. What were the other types of locations they would go to? And then we also knew this kind of what was a UPS rule, which was, you might have heard this, no left turns. So, so what we also saw is that every time we added a location on the way to work that was on the right, that would get the morning returns. You're on your way to work, you're going to drop it off. You want your next movie to come, you pull into a 7-Eleven, drop it off. Whereas on the other side of the road, in the right-hand turn, you'd go to pick up your next one on the way home from work.
Oh, that's so interesting. God, I would never think of this.
So the algorithms were impacted by demographics, type of location. Was it on the right-hand side of the road on a traffic, lane? And then also, of course, there's new releases all the time. So, and how do you determine the demand? If the movie studios could predict demand accurately, they would be rolling in dough. But as you can see over the last couple months, there's been some huge duds that there's been a lot of money invested in. So we had that same problem, and at the same time, it was different titles impact other titles. So we were able to develop an understanding of how an action title that does over $50 million either drags along a drama that did 10 or negatively impacts another action film. So it was a very complicated formula, but 50% of the inventory in the kiosks were rented every day, which, if you can imagine going into a Blockbuster and 50% of that inventory being rented out, earning money, that was really our secret sauce. Is instead of charging $4 for a 3-night rental, we were charging $1 a night. But by doing so, increasing the ROI on the inventory versus kind of the traditional model.
Wow. And how many movies does that Redbox machine hold? Is there a few hundred in there?
Yeah, there's like 325. We also were always working on increasing capacity, and we used to sell DVDs out of the machines as well, and those were taking up 2 slots. So eventually, when we decided not to. We had a huge success in one sale, and then everything flopped after that. We sold, I think it was 18,000 copies in the St. Louis market of a commemorative DVD about Bush Stadium. And then after that, everything failed. So,
that is super weird. That's so random. It's just like noisy data. Tell me about some of the fraud scams you encountered with Redbox, because I assume, just having been a crappy jerk teenager, because I assume if you need a credit card to go rent something, I can go get and I don't want to give anybody any ideas here, but I can go get a Visa gift card from a CVS. I can rent 10 DVDs for 99 cents each, and I'm not going to ever return those if I'm a piece of crap. Or I could probably rent a bunch of video games, because I know at some point you had either tested or you have video games. I could get those and I could sell them on eBay for 50% off after essentially buying them from you illegally, stealing them for 99 cents each. And you can't do it. You can't find me because it's a gift card. I bought it with cash from the drugstore. Surely this must have been a thing.
Huge problem. I think by 2009, this was well over $100 million of loss each year.
Oh,
I think it was
my God, that's way bigger than I thought.
50 million. So you're exactly right. We had two major fraud categories. The first one was what you described, where people would go to their local grocery store, buy a Visa gift card, usually a $20, $25 gift card. They would rent a game and 2 movies or 3 movies, spend the rest of one of our big attributes was there was no membership. You didn't have to put in where you lived or your phone number or anything. Unless you wanted a receipt, you would put in your email, but you can create emails. So, and people would do exactly as you described. They would they would rent a game and a couple movies. They'd spend what the balance was on that card and never return. And then when we tried to charge it, of course, we don't know who it is or what it is. And when we went to Visa and to MasterCard and American Express, they said, well, you can't stop, if you treat those people, because there's a BIN number on a Visa gift card that identifies that it's a gift card. And so we knew that. And so we went to Visa and said, we don't want, we're getting so much theft, we don't want to rent to these people. And their response was, look at your contract with Visa. If you deny treating them equal to that's our whole premise is it's just like a Visa card. Mm-hmm. If you deny them service, you're violating your contract.
Oh,
and
man.
You can't, and we won't let you take any visas. Now you might know that when you go to a gas station, when you put in the card, they authorize typically a $50 charge on your card. So we said, well, can't we do that? And because apparently the Petroleum Association that represents gas stations had the same problem. You would put your card in, fill up with $50 worth of gas, and then your card was no good, and you'd walk away, and they couldn't collect. So they went to Visa and got approval to do a $50 advance charge before they would start pumping gas. But Visa said, okay, we'll consider it, but the process is, a 2-3 year process. So what we ended up doing is first of all, I hired a couple former Visa execs who had experience with this. And together we worked out essentially what became a credit assessment. Because what I learned is the minute we send the card for approval to Visa, we have to, if they say yes, we have to accept it. But we don't have to send it to them. We can so what we did is we identified not looking at the BIN number, but what are the characteristics of a customer that has a high likelihood of ripping us off. It turned out it was renting between midnight and 4 a.m., renting certain types of movies, primarily horror movies or scary movies. And there was 3 or 4 other characteristics. And every time from that point on, every time someone would put their card in, we would, before we dispensed the movies and before we sent the card to Visa, for example, we would, in a split second, not even a second, a quarter of a second, we would run a risk assessment against that card, and again, because of the, not the card itself, but the characteristics, and then either not be able to dispense the movie, or say, hey, come back another time, and or accept it. Unfortunately, that caught some good customers,
Sure.
in that analysis, because good customers also rent after midnight and before 4 a.m. and rent horror films. So,
Yeah.
but it did cut the loss in half.
Wow, you saved $50 million per year by figuring this
80.
out? 80. Oh,
80.
sorry. I thought you said there's 100. So do you remember what the other characteristics are? Because when I hear fraudster, profile of a fraudster is somebody renting a horror movie after midnight before 6 a.m. What are the other? That's just funny somehow. Do you remember what the other bullets on here were?
Well, it was outdoor locations,
Okay,
so
well,
it
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
like going into the store. There was almost always there was a game involved in the transaction. So a horror
Because they're high
movie,
value.
yeah, horror
Yeah.
movie, because and we were doing, $60-70 million a year in rentals for games at this point. So it was a big business. So anytime there was a game, a horror movie, and after midnight, it was high likelihood. But if it was outdoor, even higher. A brand new customer, higher. So each of these, we allocated points against it. So this was worth 10 points, this was worth 5 points. And if they added up to be above a certain amount of points, then we denied the transaction.
That is so interesting. Man, that's fast. I don't know why I'm so interested in that. It's just so interesting that you figured out, okay, what all these frauds have in common? Okay, they're all at these locations. What do those locations have in common? Okay, they're all outside. All right, they're renting a game and they're renting a movie. What kind of movie? Oh, horror movies. These people tend to be more, I don't know, sketchy or something. Or maybe horror movies resell for more if they're just selling them. Who knows?
Maybe.
That's
But
so
it was
strange.
but it was such a, this was what was so fascinating and so enjoyable about, these companies that I've worked at, is that there was hundreds and hundreds of things that could be improved. And it just needed, really good people working on it, and, enough resources to be able to, do A/B testing and evaluate. And of course, not every idea works. Like you mentioned, we saw these huge lines and in front of machines, and when it got over 7 people, we saw people abandoning the line, just saying, I'm just trying to return. I'm not going to stand here. And we identified a number of things that were causing that amount of time. The first one is browsing, trying to select which movie you want to rent was taking, just for one movie, was typically taking a couple minutes.
Yeah.
You're browsing and like this. So over time, we tested different ways and different quantities of titles to have in the machine. And we found that when we reduced the selection down to around 66 or so films, that amount of time decreased by about 30-40 seconds.
So paradox of choice. Like, oh, but what if she wants this one? It's like, okay, here's one in each genre, or two.
Right.
Go away.
Too much. Too much. Then we also saw that in the light box, and we tested by putting these eye trackers that looked at how you look at that light box. And we found that people go in a Z pattern. So they start along the top and then angle down to the bottom and then along the bottom. And only after that, they start looking in the spaces in between. So we knew that if we put the obvious choices, the biggest hit titles in that Z, and also we would include highly profitable titles, the higher profit, the more obvious, we could reduce the transaction as well. And So these were just examples, but of course, one of them was the notorious side slot for returning. And like you said, people were not comfortable with other people in their personal space.
Right.
So that idea, it kind of like building those shipping centers all over the market, all over the country for Netflix. We realized, you know what? At a certain point, why don't we just put a second machine right next to it? And we had 8,000 of those, and several thousand with 3 and 4 kiosks side by side to address that problem. We did many other things, but those were the kind of two big ones.
It's so interesting to see that. Yeah, it's almost like having two coffee places right next to each other, two Starbucks locations or two registers at a Starbucks location open at the same time, because the line scares people away at a certain point. And it's just the amount of testing. I mean, you can't just put this in and run it. You've got to look at all the data constantly and be updating it. And no wonder you had 17 analysts. I know that there's so much more to the story. The industry was fighting you. What's this about studios and Walmart kind of refusing to sell you DVDs at some point?
Yeah, it all started in the summer of 2010. The 3 of the big 6 studios that represented roughly 40% of all the movies was Warner, Fox, and Universal, had done some studies, some surveys at Walmart and other locations, asking customers who were renting at Redbox. They would ask them, if this movie had been available, if this movie had not been available to rent at Redbox for $1 a night, would you have considered purchasing this? And 8% of the customers said, yeah, I would have considered purchasing it. It's not a very, it wouldn't be a number I would operate on, but the studios calculated that they were losing $400 million in sales just at Walmart alone because of this, because Walmart was selling $5 billion worth of DVDs a year. The studios were making roughly $12 to $13 profit per disc. And Walmart, we had a kiosk in every single Walmart. So based on that, they decided to stop. They contacted us one day and said, you know what? We're not going to sell to you anymore. We were direct with each of those studios. And they said, we'll sell to you, but you've got to wait a month until so that Blockbuster and Blockbuster can rent them for $4. And this kind of goes back to this utilization number I described. I'd say almost on an every other week basis, I was showing studio execs the math that we were generating more revenue at $1 a night than Blockbuster was at $4 for 3 or 4 nights.
And they just can't. It's crazy how protective these businesses are of their. I mean, you're proving these are antiquated ideas on how these things should be distributed. And some of them must have seen that and gone, okay, this math checks out, but I don't want to be the one that says this is okay, and then everybody else thinks I'm an idiot who's running the industry. So it's almost like. What is it? Collective action problem, right? Nobody wants to stick their neck out because the other execs are going to go, "Hey, Jordan okayed this. You got to axe that guy. He's going to ruin the whole company." So everyone's like, "Well, this seems like a good idea, but I don't really want to lose my job, so I'm just going to say no."
Right. Yeah, there was so much of that, so much fear in being the first one or supporting a new idea. There was also lots of kind of trends going on and general beliefs about the future. People were always talking about, well, what do we do in 10 years? What do we do when you can stream and all those kinds of things? And each studio had their own kind of cultural concept of today and the future. And so basically they thought, you know what? Even though we're generating tens of millions, by this time, we're spending $400 million a year on movies. The next year, we spent $800 million on movies. So in the summer of 2010, these 3 studios contacted me all within a few days and said, we'll sell to you, but you got to wait a month. let Blockbuster, and a lot of this, when I'd ask them why, one of the comments I heard was, we just spent $20 million making this movie, and you're demeaning the value of our content by renting it for $1. It's like, we invest all this time and money into the content. And I'd say, well, $4 isn't that much better, but, it was an accepted, kind of model. So what ended up happening, and of course I said, well, I'll just go to a distributor that resells your product. And they said, no, we've already contacted them. If they resell to you, we will cut them off as well. So they'll never be able to buy, so companies that, Comtron, Ingram, VPD, companies that were major distributors would have been cut off had they sold a DVD to us. So what are our choices were this: we provide our customer with only 60% of the hit titles and say, go somewhere else and pay more? Or is there a way around this? And, one of the kind of going way back to my video store days, one of the big challenges we faced was what is called first sale. So what we knew we could do is we could go to Target and Best Buy and Walmart and buy DVDs, take them out of the shrink wrap, put our label on it, and put it in the machine and rent it totally legally. But at that point, we were buying on average 100,000 plus copies of the latest releases, your big hit titles.
They must have noticed this, right? Like, hey, this guy came in and bought 400 DVDs, many of them the exact same copy. Yeah, that happened at our location here too. At some point, Walmart's looking at the same data as you guys and going, yeah, every time we get a new shipment of DVDs, some dude walks in, fills the entire cart, and leaves. What's going on here?
Well, and, of course, we had a Redbox machine in most of those locations.
He opens up the back and shoves them in and walks out. I mean, that's got to be obvious, right?
No, in fact, that's what, the field team that ran the Redbox operations created relationships with the Walmart managers. And so these guys would instead of putting them on the shelf and having to take them off, they would put boxes of them back in the back office. So when our guys would come in, they would just scan the box and we provided a credit card to every one of our about 500 of our employees. And so not all of them had to do that. And of course, we would always tell them, don't wear your Redbox shirt. And one day I did get an email from, actually, these were the old flip phones. So I got a message with a picture from a guy who was the president of Universal, which was one of these three studios. And he said, look what I saw at the Walmart. It's one of our guys in a Redbox, red Redbox shirt. And there was this big display of Planet of the Apes. And he was sweeping all the discs, right off the shelf into his basket, into his car.
Like, so obvious.
So, yeah. So shortly after that, the studios got the retailers to enforce a 5 maximum. So there was signage at every single cash register and Target and Walmart and Best Buy saying 5 copies at the most. So very few of those locations enforced that. And still many of the managers would put them in the back. But sometimes you'd get to the front desk and they'd have to go back and forth for 5 at a time.
Yeah. Same guy comes out, shirt's inside out, goes back to his car, shirt tied around the waist with an undershirt on. I mean, it's just like such a charade here. It's such a funny, it just shows you that these studios, like, they're just swimming against the stream. And now, of course, it's just such a foregone conclusion that that streaming was going to happen, that renting movies was going to happen. I remember they fought Blockbuster in like the 80s or the whatever when they found. I mean, it was just always these entrenched interests going against innovation. What is this? Speaking of Walmart, what is it? You took a pretty extreme measure to get out of a meeting with them at one point. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. But before I do, let me just say one thing. about this effort to get movies at Target and Walmart. We weren't the only ones. The studios also cut off Netflix because they knew that if you have a subscription, there's no need to buy a piece of content. And I think it was, I think in our society now, our shared services economy, where, you don't need a car, you've got Uber. You don't need to buy a movie, you've got Netflix. I think this was like one of the early recognitions of this impact of subscription and rental that affects people's mindsets about owning, which, for the studios was a hugely profitable part of their business. But, I think it's a real interesting trend to keep on top of because it's impacting lots of industries.
That's true, right? Because the studio really is profiting from you buying that movie and not using it 99.99% of the time. Because they're charging you to own that thing that you watch every year, once on Christmas or twice, maybe if your kids love it. And now that we're figuring out ways to make this more efficient, like I don't need a car because I only go somewhere 4 times a week and I work from home. Well, I can just Uber and it's cheaper than insurance, which is now making less money. It's cheaper than me buying the car, which is a lost sale for Ford. And I'm able to just sort of rent it for each trip using Uber. The efficiency is picking up, which means that these companies that essentially had profited to the tune of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions across industries of dollars through inefficiency, now they are not going to make that money because the whole market is becoming more efficient in terms of ownership and things being used at all times, like a taxi cab. Really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating part. But the Walmart as a customer is always kind of a tricky relationship. They're I admire them greatly. I mean, they do a lot of good things, and they help you as a vendor, as a provider of services, to get better and smarter and so on. So, they were one of the first to start to work on their vendors being more energy efficient. Put in different lighting. Reduce your amount of trips and so on. So they were always, and we were doing just a hair under $300 million a year in revenue with them, which was our number one client. So they were always really tricky, and we would kind of make the pilgrimage down to Bentonville on a fairly regular basis. We had people living in Bentonville who were kind of in constant interaction, with the buying team and the relationship team on the Walmart side. But then a number of us as executives would go down there and kind of bring everybody up to date, talk about what was new, talk about things like this return slot or increasing the quantity of kiosks, et cetera, et cetera. And there was this one meeting that, we were ill prepared for to begin with. And it was, there was a lot of things going on. Walmart wanted us to paint our machines blue. They wanted us to switch to a LED lighting. They wanted to move our machines from one place to another. There was this internal battle at Walmart where the team that ran entertainment wanted our revenue. We were paying them, 8 to 12% of our gross. We at the time they had settled us with the kind of the group, the real estate group that managed the front of the store, and all our revenue went to them. But the entertainment group is saying, no, the revenue should go to us. So we knew we were going into this meeting with a lot of kind of factions and fighting over us, and knew it wasn't going to end up good. And there was it was an early morning meeting. We had been out the night before. It was always fun going out to dinner with Walmart folks because you couldn't buy them dinner or drinks. They had to have a separate bill. And it was kind of, I've never really been a salesperson, but I noticed this little trick going on where my guys, when they couldn't buy dinner for a Walmart person who was at the dinner, they would order something and then go, I actually don't want this, knowing that the Walmart person wanted that entree and just, move it over to them. So we'd been out the night before.
Why'd you order 3 entrees? Well, I went out with 2 Walmart guys and I wanted my own. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, there's always innovation out there. So we got to this meeting. It was about 8:30 in the morning. And it was in a space that we had rented. We had a permanent office and little storage room and setup room in Bentonville. A big, long conference table, maybe, 12, 13 people there. People from Anderson Distributing, which was their big distribution for entertainment group, a bunch of Walmart folks, and my team. And I'm supposed to start the meeting. I'm at the end of the table. I pull up I'm already feeling nervous. I pull up the slides, and it is an earlier version that had a lot of comments.
Oh, no.
That I knew were like, I don't think Walmart's going to get this, or, that kind of overlay. These were shared comments. And I got, so I saw that first slide, recognized it was the wrong deck. I'm already feeling nervous. And I suddenly, part of this is real and part of it is, exaggerated. I suddenly felt a pain and made it into like, I can't go on. And Tim Hale, who was our VP of Client Relations, so this was kind of his responsibility, and he was a great friend, always an amazing person, kind of walked me into a side room to relax, and the meeting essentially got canceled.
So basically, you kind of faked a heart attack to get out of the meeting. Yeah. And
believe me, had I, I could, that was the first thing that came to mind, but I could not, had that meeting gone on and those slides had proceeded, it would have been a disastrous day.
Yeah, you might have had a real heart attack instead of a fake heart attack. So I feel like it was a kind of a fair trade. But that's real commitment, man. Like, all right, it's happening. I'm going to have a fake heart attack now. I've been keeping this one up my sleeve for a while, for emergencies. I'm surprised you admitted that in the book, though. I may have taken that one to the grave with me just out of sheer, embarrassment. Like, hey, yes, here's it. Because right now, some guy's like, I was at this meeting and he got the guy from Netflix, Redbox, he had a heart attack right there. And it's like, well, actually, he just didn't have the right slides and he pulled the emergency ripcord.
Yeah. Well, in this book, there's a lot of stories. What I'm really hoping is that people can see that, it's not always straight up to the right. All these experiences are learning experiences. Believe me, I now today check every single slide 3 or 4 times in advance and keep it on my laptop. So there's not any, accidental wrong sets of slides, and I think all these things, what I'm really hoping is that people maybe get a little laugh out of it, but more importantly, they get more comfortable with their own mistakes. And maybe I talk about this, I can't remember, but one of the most important lessons I've learned is that sharing your mistakes with other people is the best way for other people not to make those same mistakes. And companies that grow fast are likely to make lots of mistakes. And because you're adding people every day, you're trying new things, and people have to, the corporate culture typically is people hiding mistakes, and therefore, no one learns from it, and someone's bound to make the same mistake. So I'm hoping that, people get more out of just the mistake or the thing I did, but more importantly, understand it's okay. And in fact, it's incredibly beneficial to a corporate culture to share what you did, that, you had this theory, you tried it, here's what you tried, here's what didn't work, because it becomes, incredibly important for like really good growth, of a company.
I really appreciate that. I think this has been such a fun interview, a lot of insight into Netflix and Redbox, just a lot of really good business lessons and some really fun stories in here. Thank you so much for coming on the show. The book, of course, has lots more about MoviePass, which we didn't even get to talk about, more to Netflix, more to Redbox. I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Just think it's really been a fun and insightful conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, it's been really great talking with you.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.